Good afternoon, class. Welcome to Snow Day Lecture for MCS 214 on March 21st, 2018. As you can see, it's still snowing outside at about 3 o'clock. And since I can't see you in the classroom, I wanted just to post a brief lecture to introduce the reading for the weekend and connect it to a few of the things we've been talking about in class. So the reading is Television is the New Television by Michael Wolff. He's a media journalist, and the book came out in 2015, so it's relatively recent. The main argument of the book is that we've been hearing a story, or we've been telling ourselves a story about the power of the internet and digital media to transform the media landscape. And this is, according to Michael Wolff, not true or not accurate when you look at what is actually happening to the industries that were supposed to be transformed. And I wanted to start by connecting that to something that Yakub had mentioned in our last class, and that I had also mentioned in my welcome letter to you, which is the storyline that digital media and the internet and startup technology and the Western intelligence that's behind that is responsible for bringing democracy to the Arab world, among other places. So Yakub mentioned that 4 countries in 2011 and 2012 had widespread protests, and these were empowered and enabled to some degree by social media and by organizing on social media. And so to a great extent, the way that that was reported in the US and in the UK and in Europe was that in effect, social media and the internet were saving the world for democracy, or at least empowering the Arab Spring to make way for democracy. In retrospect, when you look at what's happened to those countries in the years since, and when you look at what's happened and what continues to happen in Syria, you can see that the argument that was put forward in the news and this kind of self-congratulatory posture about startups bringing democracy is actually a traditional colonialist narrative that certainly didn't materialize. And looking at the news today, when you see what's happening with Cambridge Analytica and Facebook and the collaboration between this unethical, if not illegal, trolling for people's identities, it seems very doubtful as to whether Facebook and other social media companies are bringing democracy to the United States. So I bring that up not to unduly draw in politics to the class, but just to make the point that it's always useful to question who's telling the story, and to ask yourself if the story that's being told is actually what is happening. Because what Michael Wolff says is the story that we've been told about the transformation that digital media and social media is providing is simply not true. So he starts his book with a story about a meeting that was held, that was called by a lawyer for traditional media companies in 2007, 1 year after Google bought YouTube. And he wanted to create a kind of collaboration or discussion between Hollywood studios, traditional TV studios, and some of the big players in the startup community. And what happened at that meeting is that the old media wanted to collaborate with the creators of Netscape, of Google, and so on, but the startup founders rejected the offer and said, or the founder of Netscape said, we're not in collaboration, we're against you, and it's a zero-sum game. And what was clear at that meeting is that they fully expected that they were going to win the game, and that the traditional media empires would would give way to a totally new landscape. And he brings up the example of the expectation that web series, for example, there was a web series that was about to come out, Funny or Die. It cost $2 million per episode, and it could distribute directly. So the creators of that web series expected that they were going to destroy basically South Park, which had this much more expensive production cost, and it had a partnership with Comedy Central and Viacom. So the expectation in 2007, which is where the book starts, was that these traditional media companies were about to die, that they were dinosaurs and they were going to go extinct. Fast forward to 2014, and what Michael Wolff points out is that South Park has a $30 million a year deal with Hulu. It's doing very well, whereas the web series continues to languish. And yet, what Michael Wolff says, and the main point of his book, is that even among media practitioners themselves, there's this expectation that the digital is somehow an antagonist of and about to surpass the traditional forms of media, when in fact this is not true. So he also points out that the New York Times went very hard towards digital. It put a lot of money into digital platforms without having a real sense of how those were going to make it money, even though in 2014, New York Times' revenue, 80% of its revenue came from its print operations. So I want to read you just one sentence from what Michael Wolff says. At the end of chapter 1, he says, the problem with this story is that none of it is true. The closer the new media future gets, the further away victory appears. What we need is a better, more honest guide to the changing media landscape, one based on a clear understanding of who makes money and how. So the entire book, chapter by chapter, is looking at different businesses, how they make money or don't make money. The first few chapters he talks about Yahoo. Yahoo News has a huge amount of traffic, but hardly any revenue. So the argument that if you have traffic, you automatically make money has been proven false. Similarly with BuzzFeed, he talks about in chapter 2, BuzzFeed has a larger audience than the Super Bowl, but it makes a scintilla, he says, of the revenue of the Super Bowl. In other words, it makes a tiny portion of the money that the Super Bowl makes every year. And part of the economic issue there is that digital media is all ad-supported. The money all comes from advertising, whereas half of TV's revenue comes from other sources. So the main argument of the book is that TV has actually proven to be very stable. TV remains a pillar of the media economy. Its profits in the last 20 years went from $2 billion to $20 billion. So this book and these chapters are basically a counter argument to the PBS videos that we've been watching. The video about is YouTube revolutionizing television? Michael Wolff's answer is not as much as YouTube thinks. So the last thing I want to say before I close is this is, I think, the third time that I've taught this book, and I hope that I hope by introducing it this way that it's a little bit easier to get at what he's talking about. So for your assignment, I'd like you to read the chapter on storytelling, in which he says basically what people want to pay for is a good story, and what the internet lacks, or what the internet does not provide, although it does provide a platform for sharing stories, it does not provide the skill and know-how to actually create and tell good stories. So in a sense, that chapter is arguing for this very old-fashioned technology that's been around before writing, which is storytelling, and that what humans really want and are willing to, shell out money for is a good story. So after looking at that chapter where he lays out his argument about storytelling in general, I want you to pick either the chapter on Netflix where he applies this argument to Netflix and why Netflix has been successful, or to the YouTube chapters. There's 2 chapters on YouTube where he says that the reason that YouTube has not created the revolution that it expected to is precisely because it doesn't leverage the same storytelling skills that traditional television does. So I hope you enjoy the reading. Please do get through it, and I'll see you on Monday.